Hello everyone, it's Cheryl Millett here, live at 5 on Tuesday, August the 11th. So I hope everybody's well. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes here for people to come on and talk about a few other things. So welcome, and if you're on, say hello. That would be great. There'll be a couple of things, a few things today. What I'm going to just go into and say that I'm going to talk about today is the document article that I found in researching more on these tests. Now earlier I put up a post to say live at 5 today, and it had test in it, and I don't think anybody saw it. For that reason, it was probably censored and not included. And there you go. Just working on my newsletters today, and hope I got all that done. And let me see if I make sure I have all of these things open here. Now what I did, I'll talk about a couple of things while we're here. So the good news is more and more people are getting arrested, more and more people are going to court, are being called out, and including Obama, including Clinton, including other people, which is great. The other thing is there's this new doctor, Dr. Scott Atlas, and I want to talk about that as well. And lately I've been listening, or at least these last couple of days, listening to some very interesting music, more medieval. But what I find fascinating is the actual instruments that they're playing. They're really cool looking. I had never seen them before, but I have seen a few instruments lately. I guess they're kind of violin-like. One was violin-like, but maybe it's just an old style, maybe a medieval style. And these instruments were horns and things. Now they're all dressed up. They're called Prima Nocta 1, and I'm going to put it down below. But yesterday's live at 5, I put it was the Gal, which is probably related to the Gals or Gaelic or something like that. And they were playing Last of the Mohicans with the violin, a beautiful piece. And I just love instrumental anyway, and the movies that go along with it sometimes. So I'll post that down below, and as we come on, and yes, so let's get in here, because I downloaded this one article, and this article was 30 pages in Word, and I reviewed it with a fine-tooth comb last night, and it pointed out a couple of things, it added a couple of things, it gave some names in the midst, and it was actually a very old interview too as well. Part of it anyway, with this interview, this investigative reporter included a research interview that she had done with the actual inventor of, let me just make sure my phone is off, of the test that we currently have. So I'm just going to make sure I have it off. Excellent. So the idea is, I think everybody should know this information. I don't think the fear will be there, because there's a few other things that pop in. If you have been on other live at 5s, some of the things that have popped in is our body is a miracle, and it really, really, really has a whole host of things going on, for the most part unknown to science and researchers. So some of what this article captured was I couldn't have wanted to find something more appropriate for now. This is when it's appropriate. I'm just going to read what Dr. Scott Atlas said. He's supposed to be on the coronavirus task force here. I'm not going to say he's replacing Fauci, but it's interesting. So really, good news. Dr. Scott Atlas added to coronavirus task force. And it looks like Sweden is over the COVID-19 circumstance. And if that's the case, then it portends good news for the rest of the world. Now, Scott Atlas is now part of the coronavirus task force meeting with the president, and he is countering Fauci. Now, what you've been hearing, not just from Fauci, but our own Canadian government, is, oh, this could last 2 or 3 years. Oh, it may not be the vaccine, and this and that, and that and that. And he just keeps dragging out the time, but also not making it appear that anything is, well, no, they have at times positive, but here we go. So what does he write here? He writes that I think we can open. I think we can open schools, and I think there will be no reason for another shutdown. And that's not his area of expertise, but he says these things and people just treat it as though gospel spoken. Anyway, whatever Fauci seeks, the thing is I can't outline some of these things, so I read this. And then, yes, so Scott Atlas is a brilliant guy, and he thinks by early October we could be well burned out of the COVID. Now, I've heard this before, and you might have read things about not finding a vaccine because of this reason, and that's what happened to SARS, so you can read that. So, in his opinion, we could see it turn inert, gone. And his reason for this, some underappreciated T cell, our immune system, along with prior immunities. Coronavirus, the cold family, right? Those kind of things. So he kind of brings it up there, and let's see what else he has. So meaning, yes, so the exposures to coronavirus, meaning colds and so forth. And the reason why I'm reading this today, that I came across it through another, Daniel is a fellow, and he brings up some of these things. He's one of the guys that I watch, especially regarding the children and things, safety and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, some people who have come down with a cold over the course of the summer miraculously ends up less likely to get the COVID-19, according to Scott Atlas. And people do get colds, they do. And this is one of the fundamental things we all need to be reminded of. Every year, and sometimes a few times a year for some people, or not at all for other people, they get colds, and there's flus, and there's food poisoning, and then it can even expand it over the years. I've heard of people getting a chest, cold, then it goes down to the chest, bronchitis, and then if it's left too long, you get pneumonia. And just telling a customer the other day that in so many ways, some people are not quite getting over them because they're pushing down, the symptoms are pushing down the mucus, which needs to get out. The fever needs to take its course, and the mucus needs to get out. Similar to having diarrhea, similar to having vomiting. These are all survival mechanisms. I've been talking about this for years, so it's kind of cool to see actually some of this stuff being talked about. Yes, so his final point is, folks, there's good news to be found there. There's optimistic news to be seen and heard if it is reported to you. So I think there's a reason for optimism out there. And I will absolutely, what do they say, second it. People probably on this call will say third it. Now the idea is here, people, I know Alive at 5, the important thing for me is to give you real information, but also with the information I have, the knowledge, the research, everything, to actually expand upon it, add to it, tie it together with other things. To me, the more we can do that, the better than just listening to somebody speak about it and say, hey, that's it, sounds good, I like it, let's go with it. And we just don't want to run with things that way. Absolutely not. So that's the good news. So I will absolutely put that on there. And this is just something little, and I know more and more people have come on here, and we're going to go through that document, that particular article that will really clear up a couple things, and I'll really be able to explain some things from that. August 2020, first 10 days in August, there's been a lot of explosions and fires going around the world. This case, Russia and Congo and Lebanon, which is most of what we've heard, and North Korea and Iraq, and I know there was all kinds of them. Let me see if I can click on here and see if it can come bigger. Australia, even Wuhan, China. Like, I'm looking at the pictures here, and these are like big balls of either flames in some cases or really, really dark smoke. So Brussels, World Trade Center, Brussels, UK, Kuwait, Amen, which is the Emirates, and Italy. Yeah, so a lot of places here. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know if any of you have actually learned about any other than Lebanon. But it does seem, and I'll just talk to this because was part of Daniel Lee, was that in Lebanon, supposedly all of the you can say Iranian Habal, yeah, I'm not going to say if I'm going to say it right, but the people who run the government has stepped down, or going to be pulled out and stepped down, something like that, maybe a combination of. But anyway, that would be positive for the people, very positive for the people, which is great. Now, what I'm going to skip into now is this document. Now, what I did is I saved it on Word, because after reading through it, I'm going, how am I going to remember what key things to read? And when I copied it into Word, it actually was 30 pages long. So you're going to have to bear with me on a couple of things, but these points are well worth remembering, just the nature of how it ties into this event, but the nature that it ties in. So let me just open it here. I'm going to go through from the beginning. I'm going to post the link to it. I just like to sometimes download certain documents anyway, just have them in certain file folders and have them just in case they're not found anymore. I can't find them anymore. This one I just found in a search engine. So this is about the corona simulation machine. Why the inventor of the corona test would have warned us not to use it to detect a virus. Now, Cheryl Millett is the inventor of the polymerase chain reaction, the PCR testing. And here's a comment from him. Scientists are doing an awful lot of damage to the world in the name of helping it. I don't mind attacking my own fraternity because I'm ashamed of it. So this is Cheryl Millett, K-A-R-Y-M-U-L-L-I-S. And he goes on and she goes on. So this is an investigative reporter that is speaking to this. Her last name is Farber. And I mean, there's a lot of information. I hope you'll kind of read this, but I want to kind of go through it. I could probably read it faster than just trying to find things. So what do you mean when we say has tested positive for the coronavirus? The answer would astound you. But getting this answer is like getting to a very rare mushroom that only grows 200 feet on a sequoia tree in the Forbidden Forest. Now, partly what she's talking about is this fella doesn't like to do interviews. But anyway, there's probably just a lot of sifting to go through. So she says that for dramatic effect, but also because she wound up against all odds finding it. Here we go. Every day she wakes up and works at shedding one more layer of ignorance by listening carefully. This is her talking. I got lucky with scientists many years ago. Epic, incredible scientists happening to cross my path when nobody else wanted to talk to them, and now their names are emerging. Their warnings and corrections crystallizing. True science, which is the nature of the natural world, is never bad news. Globalist science is nothing but bad news. Now, some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is going to tie that in. I've already mentioned about capitalism, good and bad. And so the light, dark, however you want to look at it, there's probably bad in everything, there's probably light in everything. And capitalism, according to the Sapien books that I read, has gone all kinds of crazy directions. Setting up corporations, setting up countries as corporations, putting in systems and banking and all kinds of things legally to do crazy things. So the reason Bill Gates wants you to believe a coronavirus will exterminate over 450 million people, that's right, 450 million people, didn't get any close to that, that he hates nature, God, and you. But anyway, let me read this. How many of us are infected with this novel coronavirus, and how scared should we be? First, spiritual law. Anything that tries to frighten you comes from opposition in spiritual battle. It's not the Holy Spirit, period. It's not your intuition, period. Ignore its threats and keep your wits about you. You don't have to shout. Stay safe to your neighbors. We are safe. We have an immune system that is a miracle, like the Sistine Chapel. It withstands toxic microbial inundation on the grand scale at all times while operating a superhighway of adaptive, life-sustaining genetic information on cellular bridges, emitting telegrams of vital evolutionary code slandered as viruses or retroviruses. So here you go, people. One of the things that's going to come through this is you're going to learn, if I've not said this before, viruses are environment bacteria in nature and naturally in the way it is, not like the Black Plague where we totally corrupt the environment, I guess. And that's what we have with stress nowadays. To me, it's a corruption of our environment. So here, people die, yes. And we know people get sick, yes. But people don't die the way Bill Gates would have you believe, at the mercy of malicious predatory pathogens lurking on every surface, and especially other humans. That's not science. That's probably the globalist science they were talking about. That's social engineering, and that's terrorism. And my note here, having researched this, is terrorism is made up. Wars are made up. Banking's made up. According to Sapiens, everything is made up. And we just have to ask ourselves, the big corporations of this planet have what? What do they want? We do things all the time to help, children to help get their way, or to have things end up a certain way. And we're thinking that way. So let's proceed here. So what do we mean when we say a person tests positive for COVID-19? Well, we don't actually mean they have been found to have it. So we don't actually mean that they have been found to have it. This is, we've been hijacked by our technologies, but left illiterate about what it actually means. In this case, I am in a rare position of having spent time with and interviewed the inventor of the PCR, and now presently available for COVID. So his name is Cheryl Millett, and he was one of the warmest, funniest, most eclectic-minded people I ever met, in addition to being a staunch critic of HIV science and an unlikely Nobel laureate, but i.e. a genius. This is going to be interesting, people, because I'm actually going to blow apart the HIV as well, because it has something to do with this machine. And I think this is going to come out more and more. In fact, I just saw an email come in by John Rappaport, and it was about HIV and the testing. So let's carry on. So in 1994 is when she interviewed him. Now, it was accidentally she had him on the phone, and she said, "Can I turn on the recording?" And he said, kind of swore. It was kind of funny anyway. So let's see. One time in 1994, when I called to talk to him about how PCR was being weaponized to prove, almost a decade after it was asserted that HIV caused AIDS, he actually came to tears. The people who have been taking all your freedoms away in recent weeks, they're social engineers, politicians, globalist thought leaders, bankers, WHO fanatics, and the like. Their army is composed of mainstream media, which is now literally around the clock perfect propaganda machine for the Gates-led pandemic Reich. So Cheryl Millett was a scientist, and he never spoke like a globalist, and what said once memorably when accused of making statements about HIV that could endanger lives: "I'm a scientist, I'm not a lifeguard," and that's a very important line in the sand. Somebody who goes around claiming they're saving lives is a very dangerous animal and should run in the opposite direction when you encounter them. Their weapon is fear, and their favorite word is could, and they entrap you in a form of biodebt, creating simulations of every imaginable thing that could happen, yet hasn't. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? So Bill Gates has been waiting a long time for a virus with this much, as he puts it, pandemic potential. But Gates has a problem, and it's called the PCR. And we're going to go through this here. So there's definitely how would I say, this is a London Observer, and this is just to do with not since James Watt walked across Glasgow Green in 1765 and realized that the secondary steam condenser would transform steam power, an inspiration that set loose the Industrial Revolution, has a simple, momentous idea being so well recorded in time and place. And the idea with reading that is simple, simple, simple. And let's go on here. So what does HIV have to do with COVID-19? Now this is important because it has a connection with the way they're using the PCR machine now. So PCR played a central role in the HIV war. They call it a war. A war you don't know about that lasted 22 years between globalist postmodern HIV scientists and classical scientists. So the latter lost the war, and so what happened is other scientists came into play and had also, but they lost their career. One of them is Duisberg, and basically what you have to need here. So here's an outtake from the article that she published in Spin in 1994 about Kary Mullis, PCR, HIV, and actually Tony Fauci. So here, this is what Kary Mullis said. PCR, this is this test, has also had a great impact on the field of AIDS, or rather HIV research. That's an important thing to note, people. HIV, AIDS, two different kind of things. What this PCR did is it can, among other things, it can detect HIV in people who test negative to the HIV antibody test. So they were trying to find people with HIV, but yet, let's see here, I'm just going to go down here a little bit here. So Mullis and his friend and colleague Dr. Peter Duisberg does not believe that AIDS is caused by the retrovirus HIV. What this PCR test did is it, I think I'm going to wait till it kind of comes up here, but HIV virus was barely detectable in people who suffered from AIDS, and in some they could not find it. With the new technology, with the way it worked, the PCR test, which you're not supposed to use for infectious diseases, it actually made parts of the HIV come to life, and you're going to see this more as I read this. So HIV virus, yep, barely detectable in people with AIDS. PCR, new technology, and PCR made it easier to see that certain people are infected with HIV, retrovirus. He told Spin in 1992, and some of those people came down with symptoms of AIDS, but that doesn't begin to even answer the question, does HIV cause AIDS? So Mullis went on to echo one of Duisberg's most controversial claims, which is human beings are full of retroviruses, he said. We don't know if it's hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands. We've only recently started to look for them, but they've never killed anybody before. People have always survived retroviruses. Now Mullis challenged the popular wisdom of HIV and IRIS, and that disease-causing mechanisms of HIV are simple too, mysterious to comprehend. And he goes on to say the mystery of that damn virus, he says at the time, has been generated, get a load of this, has been generated by the $2 billion a year they spend on it. You take any virus, any other virus, and you spend $2 billion, and you can make up some great mysteries about it too. If you've read enough research, may and could and all these things, need to do more research, it's there. And so he says, like many scientific discoveries, the idea for PCR suddenly came. So he got a download, let's call it, and he was trying to figure out how he could find maybe more of the material, and HIV was announced to be probable cause of AIDS. So you can see how deep that went. So I was driving and thinking, so Mullis is just coming up with how he came with it. He scribbled it down, And this is a formula for DNA amplification. So basically, it's almost like a photocopy. If you have some material, let's say in the case of coronavirus, and you got it and it goes in the machine and it kind of turns and spins it and it amplifies what's there, copies it. So if it's there, it's going to be there. But here's some very interesting things here. So that's the HIV debate. And at times he was part of some like ABC Nightline they had him do, and he told them that the AIDS controversy was a much more important story about that, and so he did a couple of shows. But this was interesting. But it still didn't fulfill Mullis's ultimate fantasy, so them doing the research on that. What ABC needs to do, says Mullis, is talk to chairman of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Anthony Fauci, and Dr. Robert Gallo, one of the discoverers of HIV, and show that they're assholes, which I could do in 10 minutes. I had to laugh at that. Anyway, but I point out, this is the author investigative report, Gallo will refuse to discuss the HIV debate just as he's always done. Now, I know he will, Mullis shoots back, anger raising his voice, but you know what? I would be willing to chase the little bastard from his car to his office and say, this is Carrie Mullis trying to ask you a goddamn simple question, and let the cameras follow. And if people think I'm a crazy person, that's okay. But there's a Nobel Prize winner trying to ask a simple question from those who spend 22 billion and killed 100,000 people. This is the whole HIV thing. It has to be on TV. It's a visual thing, and I'm not unwilling to do something like that. So he's got a sense of humor, as Farber says, and yeah, and he pauses and continues and says, I don't care about making an ass out of myself, because most people realize I am one. So we got to be grateful for people like that, grateful for people who can step up, grateful for people who are not following the train of whatever they want you for the reasons they want you to hear. It just mentions that Peter Duesberg, who he defended, was abused seriously by the scientific establishment to the point where he can't even do more research. And that's probably familiar territory for other research and scientists. Some we know, some have been very vocal about Anthony Fauci as well, and that, but he, as he says here, he refused to compromise his scientific moral standards. Way to go, way to go. So let's see what we have here. But Mullis continues, he says, I'm waiting to be convinced that we're wrong, and he's happy to admit if he's wrong. A lot of people studying this disease are looking for the clever little pathways that they can piece together that will show how this works. Like, what if this molecule was produced by this one, and then this one by this one, and then what if this one and that one induce this one? And that stuff becomes, after two molecules, conjecture of the rankest kind. People who sit there and talk about it don't realize that molecules themselves are somewhat hypothetical. Number of cells that we have in our body, hypothetical. And that their interactions are more so. And that the biological reactions are even more so. You don't need to look that far. You don't discover the cause of something like AIDS by dealing with incredible, obscure things. You just look at what the hell is going on. Well, here's a bunch of people that are practicing a new set of behavioral norms. Apparently, it didn't work because a lot of them got sick, and that's the conclusion. You don't necessarily know why it happened, but you start there. Right? People get sick, you start there. And this is what I guess is where I'll go in. The body is a miracle, and they don't understand everything. This is where in the book I studied the Genome Project. The Genome Project finished under budget, ahead of schedule, and they determined we were closer to a rat and an insect and the other ones that they did the genome. So they can do that perfectly. But out of that came epigenetics, which is why genetics has its place, and epigenetics may explain more things, but still may explain more things. Observing, that's all that science is. Richard Feynman in that book, five easy pieces, something like that. I changed Richard P. Feynman, 6 easy pieces. There you go. Good book, and it's mostly the foreword that I would say, or the introduction, that is really good. So let's just see. So I went through the number of cases and stuff like that. So 450 million, and where are we? Death figure, I don't know. In this case, in this article, it's 9,000, or just under that. So what does it mean to be fully symptomatic, partially symptomatic, if the latter encompasses influenza pneumonia, which has magically, as many have observed, dropped off the cliff for 2020. So what they're saying is other deaths, the influenzas, the numbers, they're not existing because they're being put under coronavirus. And let's see. Now this is interesting because when it comes to having symptoms, which I just said from this article, they would do a check. Here, China generally, they diagnose corona with a CT scan and 1 or 2 positive PCR tests. But in the US, it's difficult to find out what makes a case. And so there's absent CT cases in this case. And then the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19, has been spreading worldwide, resulting in growing numbers of infected individuals since late 2019. Now this is just something that a website was posting here. It's nothing that the author, or the investigative reporter, or Mullis has said. That actually earlier interview is over. We're stepping into now, going into the cases in this coronavirus here. So resulting in growing numbers of infected individuals since then. So far, experts have seen that while there are severe cases, the infection is usually mild with non-specific symptoms, and there are no trademark clinical features of a COVID-19 infection. Now, let me find the part here. Okay, so yes, first week's tests were done on sick people, but I really want to talk to you about how it works. So it seems like, yes, they have abandoned the classical diagnostic medicine, which would be even, listening to your chest, and in favor of the biotech. So that's very important to understand how biotech can really make an ass of itself in the world of a body that they don't quite understand. Interesting, isn't it? So here's what we have to understand about the PCR test. CDC 2019 nCovid real-time RT-PCR diagnostic panel. That means it's a needle in the DNA haystack test, a PCR test. There you go. So it finds fragments. So fragments, you probably know, fragments, let's just say fragments, from an email from Carrie Mullis to the widow of boxer Tommy Morrison, whose career and life was destroyed by an HIV test, and who litigated ferociously for years against the test manufacturers. Dr. Mullis wrote on May 7th, 2013, PCR detects a very small segment of the nucleic acid, which is part of a virus itself. The specific fragment detected is determined by the somewhat arbitrary choice of DNA primers used, which become the ends of the amplified fragment. So let's just take it down to like this. If your car had various parts in it, and you had one part, like a tire, let's say, and we wanted to determine that tires were on the car, and you took the car and you took a fragment of somebody else's tire, okay? So this is very important. I know it's going to come up here, but somebody else's tire, not the car itself, but somebody else's tire, another car's tire. And you say, that's it. That's the piece we're looking for. They could have used entirely different rubber, different plastic, whatever it is, but that's the piece they're looking for. So if things were done right, infection would be a far cry from a positive PCR test. I'm going to read that again. And again, we're going to go through more information here so it kind of makes sense. If things were done right, infection would be a far cry from a positive PCR test. So if you have to come up with a whooping amount of organism to cause symptoms, huge amounts of it, Dr. David Raznik, a biochemist, a protease developer, and former founder of EM, a lab called Viral Forensics, told me, this is the investigator code, you don't start with testing, you start with listening to the lungs. I'm skeptical that a PCR test is ever true. It's a great scientific research tool. It's a horrible tool for clinical medicine. 30% of your infected cells have been killed before you even show symptoms. By the time you show symptoms, the dead cells are generating the symptoms. So I asked Dr. Raznik what advice he has for people who want to be tested for COVID-19. Don't do it, I say. When people ask me, he replies, no healthy person should be tested. It means nothing, but it can destroy your life and make you absolutely miserable. And that probably has a lot to do with this and that. But the idea is there's a lot of things that are kind of going on here. Let me find something here. But I hope that kind of sunk in there. If you're healthy, you don't feel anything, don't get tested. I don't know if you've heard about the false positive tests and how many there are, and CDC says 49% of the testing is false positives. This PCR test can easily do it by actually, again, first of all, you have a fragment. Now, I'm going to try and find, I want to stay on track here. Only a fragment, because this has a lot to do with how you need to look at the PCR and how it actually works, this test. Yeah, as she says, we're lost in a simulation seeking to grab hold of truth and reality. Now, one way that I do that is to grab hold of words, slow them down, and analyze them. So this is the reporter talking. Globalists love to weaponize words and make spells out of them, hypnotic. So we're going to kind of go in somewhere, but the idea is inventing new words and force you to use them and live them, like words coronavirus, social distancing, COVID-19, tested positive. So whether we realize it or not, this phrase is an echo of HIV think, which I swam through for most of my so-called career in journalism, choking and spitting all the way out. The globalists write code, and they encode viruses, isn't that interesting, and give them a weaponized video game identity. And in this video game, you lose all your freedoms and must display gratitude and servitude. Viral code trumps all other forms of politics, and nothing can counter it, especially not science. So the virus is also a sweeping metaphor for the spread of misinformation, which means anything outside the religious doctrines not recognizable by classical virology. So let's see. So she goes in a little bit more. If you're looking at kind of that talk about globalist environments, socialists, that kind of thing. So here, I know I'm jumping around. It's probably better to do all of it, but you can go through it. So they refuse to learn the first thing about the natural life of viruses in humans. They did peer into this world. They would find beauty, truth, and wonder, and they would find that viruses are rarely deadly, always misunderstood, and actually trying to protect us. This is what I've said about, and I know I researched this in my book, and this is actually what the doctors of 100 years ago had said about how things happen for a reason. And the cold is a brilliant way to let out the toxins in the body. You'll have to put it in with all the stages of disease to really understand it better, but that's that. So the obsessed with spreading and the obsessed with viruses is because they want to shut down all forms of communication, information, And let's say every time somebody takes a swab, a tissue sample of their DNA, it goes to the government database. So she says. That's what says Dr. David Rasnick. That's what he says. So they're just not looking for the virus. And he says, please put that in your article. So interesting. And then you have these, 23andMe and the one that Ancestry.com does. And I don't know if you remember this, but it wasn't too long ago where they actually, and I went and read the articles on it. A pharmaceutical company came in and bought or gave them money or something like that, number of shares or whatever, but a very, very hearty sum of money, let's just say, and a big relationship. So there you go. So at the end of the day, we're excited about finding maybe people that we know. All good. That's the good. And then the dark side is the pharmaceutical companies can come in even after the fact and then start playing with that. So let's hear. HIV, the death spell code, came to people from the form of 2 antibody tests called this and that. I think this is more for me. And not the PCR tests. They came later to measure viral load, maybe how much they have in it. But were specifically not used for diagnosing HIV. Rather to stress people out about their surrogate markers and to represent where they stood in their battle against HIV. Did people really need to be in a battle against HIV? This was the trillion-dollar question. So in any case, those tests were not built on a gold standard. And if you have only first hearing about gold standard now, this is an important piece. Now, gold standard, which is not what these PCR tests are built on. It's a piece of the tire of another vehicle over here that they decide they're going to use for the reasons they do. And here, so in any case, those tests were not built on a gold standard, which means purification of an actual virus. So you might have heard this at some point where they said, well, they're not using the full virus. They're not using the actual virus. They didn't get it from China. And purification means that the pathogen has been separated from all else. HIV co-discoverer and Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier famously told journalist Tahi in an interview, I repeat, we did not purify. And it's the same with this, people. This is important. So what they're testing, what they're looking for, isn't even a purified piece of the virus, a piece of the actual virus, because they didn't have it, and so no gold standard. So you can imagine they're trying to do this to create vaccines. Crazy, crazy people. HIV was never separated from everything else. It was and is a laboratory artifact, a set of lab-tortured antigens around which a test was built, a test which shattered countless millions of lives. Because people watched TV and believed what they were told, they didn't get a chance to hear what Carrie Mullis or dozens of other real scientists had to say about supposedly deadly retrovirus HIV. So nothing was proven before it was asserted, and this became the norm and paving the way for the situation we are now in, which is another viral, it's just another one, isn't it, really, from HIV. But I like this part because this is what I've been saying to people for weeks now. Global viral communism. So we're all dreaded this would happen, but we never dreamed they would choose a cold virus, a coronavirus. Now I put in brackets brilliant choice, because after thinking about it, going, how everybody has the ability to create a cold, because when you bring your immune system down, or when you suppress not taking care of yourself, you can end up, when all is relaxed, or in case when you get too far and you get really chilly and cold, you can come down with symptoms that are going to tell you, get the heck out of the cold, go put your coat on, little one. And so this is how brilliant, because this is in ourselves naturally. This is the miracle of our body to produce, and to have more of it to actually bring about the mucus discharge. Mucus discharge is a very good thing. So in the early 1990s, PCR came into popular use, and Kary Mullis was awarded the Nobel Prize for it in 1993. And PCR, simply put, is a thermal cycling method. Thermal cycling method used to make up billions of copies of a specific DNA sample, making it large enough to study. A photocopy, many of them. That's it. That's it, people. So what we can still glean out of it is they never used the DNA or the virus itself, number one. And number two, we could be making a mountain out of a molehill by the way they use this PCR testing, which is why false positives. And apparently, all over the world, they use different numbers to spin it, to copy it. And that would cause a problem as well. So PCR is a needle in a haystack technology that can be extremely misleading in the diagnosis of infectious diseases. Again, we want to get back into the classical science, checking, how does the lung, do you have any symptoms? Otherwise, forget going to get tested. This is the sad thing about, they're going to make people show a paper. No, I'm going to put it out there. That's not going to happen anyway, because this is too important not to get around to more and more people and to come out. In fact, I'm probably going to share some of this with the officials that send me lovely emails and updates. Here we go. So Mullis himself came to the front line arguing against the PCR as a diagnostic tool. With PCR's rise, the HIV industry complex weaponized it to insert now they could see HIV more abundantly, hence their malignant foe, Peter Duesberg, was toast. Yes, so he was definitely, because they were against this PCR using the way they were using it, and good scientists, that they got what they got. Let's see. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. The first thing to know is that the test is not binary. He said, in fact, I don't think there are any tests for infectious disease that are positive or negative. Now, I had to reread this a few times. I'm going to try and see if I can summarize that, because it is important, because what we're getting back is positive or negative. And I think it has to do more with the amounts. So if there's more, then it's a false positive. If there's less, then it's a negative, if that makes sense. So really, they're saying positive, negative, but it's really more of an amount. Mathematically speaking, it's just kind of like an amount, and if they have this certain amount, then you're positive. So in that case, if the photocopier keeps going past 35, you're positive. And if it didn't go enough, then you're negative. And negative on what? We've already talked about it, right? So PCR is really a manufacturing technique. You start with one molecule, you start with a small amount of DNA, and on each cycle the amount doubles, which doesn't sound like that much. But if you double it 30 times, so I was saying the numbers 35, 40, and all these, you get approximately 1 billion times more material than you started with. So as a manufacturing technique, it's great. So what if they wanted to do with certain DNA material, some experiments, some research, they could put something in like the PCR, spin all they want, and they could come out with billions of it, rather than taking it from somewhere or allowing it to grow, or however that works. What they do is then attach a fluorescent molecule to the RNA as they produce it, and so forth and so forth. So let's say they go through all the numbers here, which I don't think we need to, because I'm only on page 21. And so now you can, from knowing that you spin it more, if one country says, I'm going to do 38, that's the process, and they'll get more positives and more false positives, and the other way. So Yes, she says, yes, you read that right. Labs can manipulate how many cases of COVID-19 their country has. More tests, depending on how they're doing it, they can have more results on the positive. So this is how the Chinese made their caseload vanish all of a sudden. They're doing tests with a photocopying, turning it over and building it at whatever they're doing, 20, 25, whatever they think is going to give them a negative. And so that's pretty cool. So that's playing with that test. So you can play with the test, and you're going to do what you're going to do based on what they're telling you to do. And all the fear stuff comes in from, you're positive. So let me see here. So David, this is still the biochemist, whatever, says, he's been quoting Alice of Wonderland recently because it's the only way he can wrap his head around it. Alice said, sometimes I can believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. So we can put some light on there. Let's just see here. Now they go into some papers here. I know I highlight them probably for myself, and it has to do with testing, has to do with, the abstract. So this was an abstract, a research paper you find that would be published. It basically said that in asymptomatic populations, the chance of a positive coronavirus test being a true positive is only about 20%. So therefore, 80% will be false positive. CDC had a number of 49%. But we know, people, that the viruses isn't something we have to be. Now, if it's made as a bioweapon, there could be some crazy stuff going on there. So here the estimated is 1% of the people are actually infected in the population of this particular one, and you could have 80% false positives. So to do a real analysis of how many are positive would be a thing. I can't even fathom how they would do that. And of course there's no gold standard. We have to be mindful of that, which means that the purification of the actual virus hasn't been done. It hasn't been done. So they're not even using a piece of the actual virus in the testing to compare or to see if it's within our body. So we have one thing on one hand. There's nothing to fear other than if you worry about health, then the first thing you should do is all the healthy things that you understand and learn about and know about, and those are the kind of things, just the basics. We get simple, and we don't need to know exactly how it works in the body. We don't need to know. We really don't need to know. Just if it makes you feel good, and we can understand that good food, not the whites, not the processed food, make us think better, sleep better, but there's also the mind in there, but I won't go in there. So, yes, so Dave Rasnick, this doctor, had exchanges with David Crow about this and concurs. To my knowledge, they have not yet purified this virus. So what do they have here? It's like fingerprints. With PCR, you're looking at a small number of nucleotide, like a small part of the DNA that this virus would have, or something that's part of there. No, maybe not DNA. You're looking at a tiny segment of gene, like a fingerprint. When you have regular human fingerprints, they have to have points of confirmation, many points of confirmation. And there are parts that are common to almost all fingerprints, and it's those generic parts in the coronavirus that the PCR test picks up. Now let me repeat that. There are parts that are common to almost all fingerprints. And it's those genetic parts of the coronavirus that the PCR test picks up. Now they can have partial loops, but if you only look a few little samples of fingerprints, you're going to come up with a lot of segments of RNA that we are not sure have anything to do with the coronavirus. They will still show up on the PCR, and you can get down to the levels where it's biologically irrelevant and then amplify it a trillion-fold. So remember, they're taking it down small so that it's almost like a lot of other things, and then they're amplifying it trillion-fold with the PCR test. Okay? So I don't even know if everybody's still here with me, but we'll carry on. All right, because I've got this document open. Let's see what here. So the primers are what you know, and I already know the strings of RNA for the corona family. So the regions that are stable. So basically, they are familiar with the corona family, and they have something they could have used for the PCR test, and that is that. So yeah, okay. All right, SARS isn't the virus that stopped the world. That's right, they're having a conversation. PCR for diagnosis is a big problem, he continues. When you have to amplify it these huge numbers of time, it's going to generate massive amounts of false positives. Again, I'm skeptical that the PCR test is ever true. So whether it's a negative, positive, that goes back to the earlier Mullis thing, but there's no false. There's no positives or negatives here, no, in that case. So Crow described a case in the literature of a woman who had been in contact with a suspect case of corona in Wuhan, and they believed was the index case. She was important to the supposed chain of infection because of this. They tested her 18 times, different parts of the body, like nose, throat, different PCR tests, 18 different tests, and she tested negative every time. And then they, because of her epidemiological connection with other cases, they said, we consider her infected. So they had 18 negative tests, and yet they said she was infected. And so that was something that was in a report or published or posted, let's say that. Let's see, yeah, so that goes in about this test. So there, if you're going to read it, you're going to see that there's a number of things that they quote in here that were of certain particular reports, papers that were posted up. And then she asked Crow what he thought about Kary Mullis would say about this explosion of PCR insanity. And he says, I am sad that he isn't here to defend his manufacturing technique. He said, Kary did not invent a test. He invented a very powerful manufacturing technique that is being abused. What are the best applications for PCR? Not medical diagnostics. He knew that, and he always said that. So he never changed his story. Of course, we got the change story on evolution. Even my daughter was taught that. The evolution, Darwin evolution, is now in the garbage. So they went and they talked more, and then he says, I don't think they understand what they're doing, he said. I think it's out of control, and they don't know how to end this. This is what I think what happened. They have built a pandemic machine over many years, and as you know, there was a pandemic exercise in the fall, Gates global thing, that not long before this whole thing started. And then there was speeches and stuff that were dropped. You know, we're going to hit a very big... How did Fauci know? How did these people know? There's just no way they would know that kind of things. Other things I can see, but that, no. So there's a lot of pointing fingers here. John Hopkins Center for Health Security, Bill and Melinda Gates, China, World Health Organization, and most of the stats, the projections and modeling is actually coming out of the John Hopkins. So the stuff that you're seeing in media is coming out of there. So David, in conclusion, finished his sentence. The PCR test for corona is as good as, and his reply made me laugh, and I didn't know I could still laugh. Oh yes, so this is, I got to read this, and then we're almost done. Actually, this is the last piece here. It's as good as that Scientology test that detects your personality and then tells you you need to give all your money to Scientology. So that's how David Crow, if I remember the people that she was speaking at. So Cecilia Farber is half Swedish, raised there, and she knows socialism from the inside. She has focused her writings on freedom and tyranny, and had early focus on pharmaceutical industry and media abuses on human liberties, and she has been under ferocious attack for her writings on HIV/AIDS, where she has worked to document the topic as a psychological operation and rooted in fake science. So she's a contributor of Uncover DC and the Epoch Times, and has past written for Harper's, Esquire, Rolling Stone, and more. Having been gravely injured in legacy media, she never wants to go back. She is the recipient of the Semmelweis International Society Clean Hands Award for Investigative Journalism, and was under such attack for her work she briefly sought protection from the FBI and NYPD. She is an author, Serious Adverse Events, An Uncensored History of AIDS, and the editor of Truth Barrier and an investigative and literary website. And she co-hosts the Whistleblower Newsroom with Christina Borg and Son on PRN Fridays at 10 a.m. There you go. So that's that, people. Just wanted to bring all of that to you because at the end of the day, the one way for people to realize what's going on, or at least be more in tune with the actual thing that's going to event, I like to call it, is to actually get this hard evidence and to better understand things. And one piece of this is this PCR test. But the other piece of it is about understanding viruses better and infectious diseases, as they call it. I would say that certainly certain people get tripped up by certain things, and maybe the virus is there, the bacteria is there, and this had to do with cancer a long time ago. I did a lot of research on this, where they said in the writings that where they find cancer, they find viruses. But that doesn't mean the viruses cause cancer, but that was one school of science saying that. So we have to be weary of bacteria, weary of, sure you do, but the important thing is well, of course, washing, of course, what, Edinburgh and the Black Plague that went on was all about that, cleanliness, common sense. But our body is capable of fighting a lot of things. It's the miracle. So I'm going to leave it at that. It's been 1 hour. I'm not sure who's on here. It's one of those things. But I'm going to end it there for the evening and wish everybody a wonderful evening, and we'll see what kind of, I think I have another presentation tomorrow night somewhere else. So I'm going to say probably won't be to Thursday or Friday. We'll see what comes up, because if there's nothing crazy come up, I'd rather you look through the documents or the links or watch them instead of me coming on giving more information. I just want to stick with the most important facts here, the most important pieces for us to digest and understand, so we are able to speak to it somewhat without crazy anger and reactions because of where we are. We are where we are. So that's good. So anyway, thank you for coming on. Thank you for watching. And yes, share the news, share the information however you want, this video or any of the links. However it is shared doesn't matter to me. But Live at 5 is all about, and of course during this event, sharing the foundational information. It's trying to simplify it and working towards, all things healthy, including us, including our planet. So that was a lot, everyone. Thank you for the time on that. Hopefully you found it well worth it. Comment. That's awesome. Love the comment. Other people appreciate the comments because it maybe inspire and motivate them to actually watch. So I encourage you to do that. After you've watched it, or after you've thought about what I've said, or maybe you have to rewatch or have time to watch it, please do that. Comment something. And forget about the certain things that may go on with the comments, as far as people going back and forth and people wanting, they have their take on it. If they haven't watched this video, then I don't even have anything to say to them. I'm not going to prove anything to anybody anymore. But I want to know, and I want to share it with this information with people who want to know. So there we go, everyone. Bye for now. Take care. Be calm, be peaceful. Let's come together, and things will go in the positive direction. Bye for now.